we like to call it the Supernatural Hour. And now, our hosts.
Welcome to the Supernatural Hour. I'm Raven, by the way.
Chad's
here.
here.
I'm Rogue.
They're so excited, they talk right over each other. You guys have all heard it's the most wonderful time of the year.
Yeah, because it's a end of summer going back to school song.
That really is when I use it, because that is the most wonderful time of the year. That being said, it's technically a Christmas song. Have you guys ever wondered about that line, scary ghost stories and tales of the glories of Christmases long, long ago? Why in the heck do they talk about scary ghost stories at Christmas time? It's a Halloween thing, right?
Right.
Well, that's what we're going to discuss tonight. We're going to talk about that very thing.
Scary ghost stories at Christmas.
Yes. Do you know where it came from?
Kinda.
Yeah, I mean, we just talked about how October was so busy that the first half of November we just kind of like, whew, right? And then by the time we've decompressed, then the holidays kick in and it gets hard to ghost. And this song was written in 1963. I actually thought it was older than that. Did you realize it was that young?
No, I thought it was older than that,
I really
too.
thought it was from like the 40s.
Yeah, I would have guessed the 40s or even the 20s, but it was written in 1963. It was written by a fellow named Edward Pola and George Wiley, or Weil. I don't know how you say that. And it was made famous by Andy Williams. So probably the Osmonds too, because Osmonds did a lot of singing with Andy Williams. But there's a really quite a long history about telling ghost stories at Christmas time, and maybe not so much here in the U.S., but very much so in Victorian England. It was a huge thing of telling ghost stories at Christmas time, and probably even precedes Christmas itself, because it's more of a pagan thing. Now,
Which I found interesting in going through that.
Right. So what did you run across?
Well, just the fact how young Christmas is. Like when you think of Christmas, you take Christmas like to the beginning, right? To the birth, not to, I don't know.
Right.
I forgot what date it turned into Christmas, but it's not that old either.
No, it was like the 1920s or the 1880. I've got it here somewhere. I'm very regimented in my notes, so if it's not right there when we talk about it, it takes me forever to find it. Right, no, I was actually surprised too, because somewhere in the back of your head, I've never consciously thought about it, but when I saw the date, I thought, wow, because I always kind of imagine, Jesus is born in the year 0, and then every year you just put up your Christmas tree after that. Mary had her Christmas tree up the next year with little Santas hanging on it and candy canes off the fireplace. But apparently that's not how it went down.
That's not how it went down, huh?
Oh.
No, oddly enough. So, if you've been listening to us for any length of time, I don't know if it was last Christmas or the Christmas before, but we have talked about Christmas Yule traditions. And, we've talked about the Yule logs and mistletoe and even, Christmas tree. All of that, most of our Christmas stuff actually comes from, pagan roots and pagan customs. And, it's the celebration of the winter solstice. And the whole idea is the winter solstice, that is the shortest day of the year. And so it's the shortest day, therefore it's darkest day of the year. The dark hangs around longer on that day than any other day, right? And we're getting close. It's
getting dark early.
I don't mind it getting dark early. It doesn't. I know a lot of people it really bothers. Doesn't bother me. The only thing is it's just weird because you're in the car, you're driving around, it feels like it's midnight, you're exhausted. You look at the clock, it says 5:30, and you're like, oh.
Right?
I guess it's not bedtime.
It does. It makes me want to go to bed early.
Yeah. So because of the long, cold night, Yule was also considered by a lot of people to be the day when spirits and ghosts were more likely to interact with you. And so that's one of the reasons why the tradition of telling ghost stories could go all the way back just to Yule, even before it was transformed into Christmas. The idea of the ghosts and the spirits of your family, and you're sitting around and it's dark. What else are you going to do, right? You go sit around the fireplace and you tell stories. And if on that longest, darkest day of the year, you're thinking about your family that's passed, and I'm sure from there, things just go crazy. It goes from reminiscing about, Uncle George getting drunk and falling asleep in the beans, and and then he's rattling chains in the kitchen.
Right.
Well, and one of the things, a lot of this goes back to kind of the pre-Victorian and Victorian England. Before you really had electric lights and those kinds of things. And so when it got dark, it got dark. I mean, you had candles and there were lamp oil and lamps and different things. But, you think about pre-Victorian England and all of the traditions that are going on, the different things that they're doing, and the fog and the long nights and everything else. And it was just one of those times when that's when you'd tell ghost stories. It just kind of fits right into that. And that was one of those things that made it into Christmas traditions, was the ghost stories. And you see that a little bit in the Dickens Scrooge book, where they
Right.
had the ghost stories and everything else. Yeah.
Right. So one of the things
The Ghost of Christmas Past.
Present and future.
Right.
Right, and there's a Barbie version
Yes.
of that.
Did you watch that today?
We watched the Barbie version today. I tend a little girl, and we watched Barbie's Christmas Carol. And there is a Christmas past, present, future.
We're going to get a movie review on it too.
Oh, no. We survived it. What's funny is Christmas, today Christmas is so commercial and so important. And literally the only thing I don't like about Christmas time is it feels like your life is shut down because you can't do anything until you get past Christmas, and you got to go to this party and you got to go to that party, and you can't, schedule anything because you might have, grandma might call and want to party on this night. And, but it wasn't always that way. It wasn't always, so overwhelming important. In fact, Oliver Cromwell, who was the 17th century, Puritan leader for the church and the government, he actually kind of targeted Christmas, at the height of his power when he could do so, and, tried to squash the frivolity and decadence that he saw in that. And, he tried to eradicate it to the point he even banned Christmas carols.
Yeah, the celebration of Christmas, not Christ's Mass, but the celebration of Christmas.
The decadence and frivolity part. Let's ban the Christmas carols and the parties and he wanted it to go back to just the religious aspect totally. And so it was, by about the mid 1800s, it was a day where most people just worked, and it wasn't considered important enough to really celebrate.
Yeah, and you can see that a little bit in the Christmas Carol story where, he was, what's the guy's name? I forget, the father. He was expected to be there at work on Christmas, and it was a big deal that Scrooge kind of gave him half a day off. Right.
So that's where Charles Dickens kind of comes in, because he's seeing, wow, everyone's working and everyone's so focused on the almighty dollar. I guess the pound in England, they didn't have dollars in England, then helping those that were less fortunate. He kind of noticed that Christmas is at the end of the year. At the end of the year, at least at the time, people would kind of, reminisce about death and those that they'd lost, and, kind of like a New Year's resolution, and in a way, not a resolution, but,
Remembrance.
Even now you get to the best of 2021, or,
You could almost call it a post-mortem.
Kind of. On TikTok right now, as I scroll through, it's what are the best videos of 2021? So, it's kind of the Dickensy era, the best of, let's sit around and talk about our relatives. So that's when he kind of merged all these concepts together, to come up with Ebenezer Scrooge, who's kind of so, really focused on his financial gain and not helping the poor. And then these ghosts are coming and helping him reminisce. And if this is a spoiler, y'all need to get a life, because this story's been around for a long time. He revisits his life and his beginnings and, the mid, and then he gets the ending of how it could end if he didn't shape up. He wrote this in 1863, the novel A Christmas Carol, and it was an instant classic. And then because of that, Christmas started to become a little bit bigger in Victorian society. And then this, especially in England, is kind of what led to, Christmas traditions coming back after Cromwell had squished them. It kind of went wild. And as you know, we've talked about Victorians here and there. This would be a good topic to just talk about Victorians on a podcast. But they're very macabre. The Victorians, they were creepy as heck. They would, their family members would die. They'd take pictures of them. They'd pose them and put clothes on. I mean, of course they had clothes on. They're not just sitting around naked, but, they'd put special clothes on them and take pictures of them and, braid hair into really intricate. I mean, they're creepy. Victorian people were creepy. So to sit around and tell ghost stories just kind of fits in with all the creepy stuff.
Very steampunkish.
Yes. So there was an author. I just saw his name. Where did it go? Boom, boom, boom. Oh, Jerome K. Jerome. This was in 1891, and he compiled a bunch of stories. His collection of Christmas ghost stories, it's called Told After Supper. And he said whenever 5 or 6 English-speaking people met round a fire on Christmas Eve, they start telling each other ghost stories. And a whole bunch of ghost story authors popped up. And so some of their names are E.F. Benson, Algernon Blackwood, J.H. Riddle, and they actually laid the groundwork for 20th century tales by people A.M. Burridge, M.R. James. Apparently, in order to be a scary ghost story writer, you have to just go by 2 initials in your last. So we've kind of talked about, the English and what they did, and we're going to bring in the Scottish and the Irish as well. As they started coming to America, they're going to bring their own customs with them. I don't have a problem with moving to another country and doing your own thing. If I move to Spain, I'm still probably going to celebrate the 4th of July. I don't know. Sorry, England. So the Scottish people, Irish people were very much into Samhain, which is the pagan holiday. That actually is Halloween. They brought that with them. The immigrants of that time really were hoping to focus on the day of their heritage, but the lore of demons and spirits and thought of the afterlife just, became very more popular in the mainstream culture. That's kind of when it cemented more into Halloween and kind of sloughed off from Christmas.
So the ghost stories kind of went up to the Halloween area,
right?
In Halloween time more so than the Christmas time, because we brought in other myths, the Santa Claus, the Rudolph, all of the other kinds of things that were very much more, Saint Nicholas and those kinds of stories more around Christmas and giving rather than the darker side of.
Right. And so it was then, at least in America, where those 2 holidays really kind of took a divergence and created their own. Halloween is ghost stories and Christmas is, more Santa and Christ and presents and elves and not so much ghost stories, but the line and the song stays there.
Yeah. Because there still are scary ghost stories that are told.
Absolutely. So I wanted to talk about the creepy Victorians and Christmas a little bit more.
Well, then do it.
I almost wonder if I should have lived back then. Because all this creepy stuff, I dig it. So, besides taking pictures of their deceased relatives and telling ghost stories at Christmas, did you know that they also sent super bizarre Christmas cards?
No.
Like morbid Christmas cards?
Is that a tradition we should pick up on? It's morbid Christmas cards to our friends?
Yes, I think we should start sending morbid Christmas cards to our friends and just seeing what they're doing. So let me tell you a little bit about some of what they did. Ready? So they were morbidly humorous. They featured murderous frogs and anthropomorphic insects.
So human-like insects.
Yes. Murderous frogs stabbing and looting a fellow amphibian. St. Nicholas.
That is funny.
Right?
And morbid.
St. Nicholas peeping through windows and stuffing children into his gift sack, which kind of comes from Krampus. Giant waltzing insects and dead robins. So a little different than the cards we send now.
Yeah, dead robins. That would be a little. Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
Merry Christmas. Here's a frog stabbing an insect. So why did they do this? They wanted these cards to be conversation starters. They wanted them to be shocking. And I think if someone sent me some weird Christmas card, it would definitely... Because these days you'd be like, what the heck? You take a picture of it and you would post it on Facebook or TikTok or Instagram.
And see how many likes you get.
See how many likes you get, or hashtag.
Yeah.
Hashtag creepy Christmas card.
That would be great, though.
Right? So, conversation starters. Some of these really just morbid, out there designs were influenced by folklore customs. For instance, in England, robins and wrens were considered sacred species. There's an author of a book called Christmas Curiosities, Old, Dark, and Forgotten Christmas. His name is John Grossman. Said images of dead birds might have been used to elicit Victorian sympathy and might reference common stories of poor children freezing to death at Christmas. So they weren't just morbid. They were supposed to almost be like a political cartoon in a way,
Get you to think
about, some other things and some issues and conversation starters, ways to start talking about current issues of the times. So I thought that was kind of cool. I want someone to send me a creepy Christmas card.
I was going to say, back then they didn't have as much entertainment. They didn't have Facebook and Twitter and TikTok, so
and TV or radio.
And TV or radio. Exactly. Yeah.
Church was a big deal. It was the social event of the week.
It is still a big deal.
Is it still the social event of the week?
To some people.
For sure.
So here's just a couple little interesting tidbits I found. Historically, December 25th has a close link to the pre-Christian solstice festival that would view midwinter as a time when the light dies and the veil between the world of the living and the dead is the most thin, and we've already kind of touched on that a little bit. But the American Goth legend writer Edgar Allan Poe set his poem The Raven in the bleak month of December. So that kind of goes back to kind of the morbidity and creepy things happening at Christmas time. This tradition of scary ghost stories actually lingered until the early 20th century because magazines would regularly run ghost stories in their Christmas issue. People kind of hung on to this for quite some time. I just kind of looked up some of these creepy ghost stories. So if you want to start a new tradition of telling creepy ghost stories around the tree at Christmas Eve, here are some good ones to look into. One is called the Kit Kat it doesn't say Kit Kat. That would be a modern day candy bar. It's called The Kit Bag by Algernon Blackwood. And I'll just read you the little summary. In this 1808 tale from prolific ghost story writer Algernon Blackwood, a law clerk gets more than he bargained for when he borrows a travel bag from his employer, who is just found innocent of murder. It has everything you expect in a Christmas story: snow, family, good cheer, and a whole lot you'll never see coming. I almost feel like I need background music to this, like I'm doing a movie trailer. A law clerk gets more than he bargained for.
Dun, dun, dun.
If you're familiar with The Holiday, and that's why she gets paid the big bucks.
The movie The Holiday.
Yeah, that is what you just heard is why I don't get paid the big bucks for this. Okay. Dark Christmas by Jeanette Winterson. A group of friends heads to High Fallen House, a Victorian gentleman's residence, for the holidays. When an old-fashioned nativity set appears in the attic, what is meant to be an idyllic trip takes a truly creepy turn. That one sounds interesting to me. And these stories, none of them are super, super long. I mean, they were longer than I wanted to read on the podcast, but they're not. It's not like a
they're short stories.
Novel. They're short stories. So the next one, Oh Whistle and I'll Come to You, My Lad by M.R. James. While on a seaside vacation for the holiday, a snooty professor discovers an old whistle with a strange Latin inscription. Unable to translate the warning, he blows it, setting off a series of eerie and utterly creepy events.
Dun, dun, dun.
The next one is called Smee by A.M. Burridge. A group of young people play hide and seek on Christmas Eve. In this ghost story from A.M. Burridge, of course, they discover much more than each other in the rooms of the house where a young girl died.
Sounds like an interesting story.
Yeah, that's my number 2. Now, this next one I am going to absolutely slaughter the pronunciation. So bear with me. Ophidial by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. Sounds good, probably wrong. In this chilling tale, written by Americana author Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie for the Guardian's Christmas Ghost Story series, it's the lives of a Nigerian family that are disrupted when a new neighbor stops by to visit. But who is the ghost in this emotional tale? You will have to read to find out.
That one does sound interesting, too.
So, yeah, give those a look. Go back and listen to those authors that I listed off if you want to hear some good Victorian creepy ghost tales.
Dun dun dun.
There's a reason that we don't make movie trailers, folks.
Exactly.
Stay spooky, my haunty friends.
I love you, Nicholas.
Hey, have a good night.
You've been listening to the Supernatural Hour at AdvancedParanormal.com. The Supernatural Hour is part of the Radio Ronin network found at RadioRonin.com. Copyright 2021 by Advanced Paranormal Services.